Hello and welcome. So excited to be here today. My name is Jodie Solberg, and I am going to be talking to you about transforming patterns, hypnosis for breaking generational cycles. So, looks like we have several people here in the room. So, we are going to get started. I am going to actually be sharing my screen. Thank you for the hearts. I appreciate that. I know we've had such a great day so far, so many fabulous presentations. So let me see if I can get my screen up here for you all. Looks like I can do that. Let's see if I can make it bigger for you. There we go. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that now. And I am, I said, going to really be sharing about what can we do about these generational cycles and patterns that we often get stuck in. So let me tell you a little bit about, see if I can get it to change. There we go. A little bit about myself so that I can give you some context where I'm coming from and what my background is. So, I've been in mental and behavioral health for the past 25 years. My background, my education is social and clinical psychology and clinical hypnotherapy. I also hold a doctorate in counseling. And I am a certified master hypnotherapist and a transpersonal wellness coach for adults and families. And so I really help people to recognize the patterns. So my job is to help you figure out, especially those subconscious patterns, those things that we're not as aware of, limiting beliefs, thoughts, and habits. So if you have unwanted thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, they often can stem from childhood and these generational cycles. So I help you to identify those and get to the root of them, pull that out, heal them, and replace them with something that's going to serve and support you better. I always think of those patterns and those cycles that pop up as kind of like the weeds. You know, the weeds pop up and we mow them over. They pop up and we mow them over, and they pop up in all different areas of our lives. You know, they can pop up in our health, in our relationships, in our finances, all over the place. And my job is to help you to not just keep going in circles and feeding back into those cycles and patterns over and over again. It's to break that pattern and break those habits, break those generational cycles so you can move forward and be free of those and pass these new lessons on to that next generation and literally everyone around you. It's a huge ripple effect. So that's what we're really going to be talking about today is how can we break those cycles and those patterns that are no longer serving and supporting you? Right? How can we change those? If you feel like you're stuck in that loop, if you feel like those weeds keep coming up, you're carrying, pain and all these things that didn't even start with you, we're going to talk about what to do about that. So, I want to start with this thought that things like addictions, and when I say addictions, it's any kind of habits that are unwanted. So, we could be talking about food. We could be talking about any kind of substance. We could talk about scrolling, any kind of avoidance type of behaviors, something that's, we're going to talk about it as a survival strategy today. So it was the solution to the problem. So, Dr. Gabor Mate, for example, talks about trauma and addiction and says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain, because it's a way to comfort and soothe and protect and take care of ourselves that often was created long ago that now have turned into adult habits and behaviors that, again, may be hindering us, may be hurting us. And so, with the right tools, they can become part of our healing journey and we can break out of that survival mode, right? That generational trauma and the things that are passed down to us, often are, emotional pain and behaviors and ways of interacting that were modeled for us or helped us survive, but now they're holding us back. And so today I'm really going to invite you to think of those habits, those patterns, not as flaws, like there's something wrong with you or it's broken or it's just always going to be that way, but really as these coping strategies that can be shifted, that we can create healthier coping strategies, and there's stories that are ready to be rewritten. So it really can truly stop with you, and you can make that choice. We have the power of choice to do that. Just often we know what we don't want anymore, and we don't know how to do something different. So, what are generational cycles? So, generational cycles are patterns we inherit. So, it's those ways, like I was mentioning, of coping, relating, and believing that get passed on unless we consciously interrupt them. So, in families that are affected by addictive behaviors, for example, those patterns can really become normalized. Have you ever said, like, I swore I would never be like my parents? And then we find ourselves sounding just like them. We get triggered. We're in that moment. There might be anger, frustration, anxiety, something coming up from the surface. And then we hear ourselves repeating those same patterns over again. So, those generational cycles are emotional habits and beliefs and behaviors that we absorb from society and from our families, even if no one talks about them or normalizes them. Because often they're showing up as things like emotional disconnection, people pleasing, be perfectionism, pressure to provide, to achieve, to perform. And they can be coped with by, again, withdrawing, disconnecting, not showing emotion, not wanting to deal with emotion, which often leads to those addictive behaviors as a way of distracting ourselves, as a way of not coping and not showing that emotion, not dealing with those things. But once we become aware of them, we can change them. So once we know and we understand, hey, this is what's happening below the surface, then we can do something about it. Often these things, especially growing up as a male person in our society, we're told, not to feel that was, weakness to show that emotion. We're told things like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. We were told so many things that were not helpful for us as we got older. Or you were modeled that, right? Somebody wasn't showing that emotion, didn't want to deal with those things, or difficult situations or traumas were just normalized. And like, that's just how it is. I had it so much worse. What's wrong with you? What do you have to cry about? Because they, again, are playing out these generational patterns and they're thinking things were so much better. But when we're little, when we're children, we internalize everything. We are wide open. We're little subconscious sponges. And as adults, so only about 5 to 10% is in our conscious realm. That's your thinking, goal setting, planning, willpower, trying to push through things. It's also where that anger and frustration and anxiety and fear and all of these things live, and judgment. Now, the rest, the 90 to 95% of what's going on below the surface in our subconscious mind, when we're little children, that subconscious is wide open and creating our beliefs about ourselves, our situations, the world around us. And we internalize things. So, something that looking back, you may have been told, well, that wasn't a big deal. Like, why did that affect you so much? Or you thought that about yourself, even. Well, that could have been internalized and created these beliefs, perpetuated these patterns that are now affecting you as an adult. So, I want to talk about this kind of intergenerational nature of trauma and addiction because they often ripple through generations. They become ways that families connect, they cope, or they avoid. You don't have to have grown up in a home with addiction to feel its effects. Science shows that emotional trauma, especially unresolved and possibly, you were not allowed to express and release things like grief, fear, or shame, can be passed down both biologically and emotionally. So when we're talking about nature versus nurture, it's both. So maybe you learn to numb, maybe you learn to avoid, maybe you learn to silence yourself because that's how your parents or grandparents survived. But we don't have to carry that forward. So, like I mentioned, the role of our subconscious is to bring in all of the information and then to make sense of it. And in our subconscious, like so, we're in a very much a subconscious state, especially growing up. We're in it all the time when we're little, bringing everything in, and it believes all of those things to be true. And it's categorizing and it's basically programming like a computer. You can think of our minds as like computers, and what is the program that was installed? Most of our patterns come from our subconscious mind. Our habits come from our subconscious mind. And so that's the part of you that runs the show behind the scenes. I like to think of it as behind the curtain. And logic, again, lives in the front, can't always fix what's rooted in survival because our nervous systems, our bodily processes, all of that is also tied into our subconscious mind. Right? We don't have to consciously think about things like our heart beating or breathing or our blood pumping through our veins or healing or things like that. We don't have to consciously be thinking of those things, but they're happening. And the same thing is said for our nervous system. We're not in conscious control of when our nervous system gets activated and we go into like fight, flight, or freeze type of mode. That's all happening on that subconscious level. And we are only designed to spend about 2 to 5% of our lives in that nervous system activation, what I like to call the emergency room. But often humans spend way more time there, especially when we're dealing with these generational cycles and these traumas and these patterns. So 95 to 98% of the time, we should be in homeostasis, we should be in our healing room, we should be good to go, and our bodies are designed for that. But our minds and our bodies are so connected. And it's not just about threats that our subconscious is always scanning for with our nervous system that are physical threats, things like lions and tigers and bears and cars coming at us. It's perceived threats as humans because we overthink all the things. And so it could be anything that even feels remotely like something that maybe happened in the past that can trigger you to shut down, can trigger you to want to self soothe or go to that coping strategy. And our subconscious mind is heavily influenced by repetition. So, repeated thoughts, experiences, and emotions. And a lot of people aren't aware of their own self talk. So, the things that we tell ourselves, what we call ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, we're repeating that over and over and over again. We have thousands of thoughts every single day. And 90% of those thoughts are repetitive. They're the same thoughts we thought yesterday and the day before and the day before that. And the majority of them are also negative. And so when we're telling our subconscious, when we're telling ourselves, I am this, and that's not changeable, your subconscious is receiving that as truth and looking for every bit of evidence to back it up. Our subconscious acts as this repository for our beliefs, whether they're empowering or whether they're limiting. And whatever we consistently think and feel, because our thoughts then create emotions, which are actually physiological experiences, sensations in our body, and we put words to them. That's actually what emotions are. And I want you to think about that. So Our beliefs create our thoughts, which create our emotions, which create a physiological response in our body, and that influences our behaviors internally and externally. I know when we think of habits and behaviors, we're often looking at the outside. What do we do with our hands out here? But your body responds. And so think about this. If you were going to be, speaking in public, or you were presenting in front of a big meeting that was really important at work, for example, if you got nervous, let's say you got nervous about that. And how do you know? How do you know you're nervous, or how do you know that you're anxious? Well, your breathing might quicken, your heart rate might quicken, you might get a little sweaty, right? In your palms, for example, may get some butterflies in your stomach. Those are all physical things that you point to say, well, that's how I know that I was nervous or I was anxious about this meeting. And then we call it a name. And so those responses, our beliefs, and then our thoughts and how we feel, then subsequently, and then how we act on the inside and on the outside, those things create pathways. They create patterns. They get cemented in like these super highways of when this happens, I feel this. And then this is how I react to it. And it becomes this reaction point. It creates a blueprint that your subconscious mind follows that impacts our decisions, our habits, and our overall behavior and how we interact with other people too. So you can see where these things just get cemented in. Again, they become like these super highways, especially over the decades, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Okay, it doesn't have to stay that way. So let's talk next about this disconnection that I've been talking about. And then we're going to talk about some of those common toxic thought patterns and what we can do about them. So, one of my favorite ways to describe addiction is this, that it's not about the substance, it's about the disconnection. And disconnection from yourself, from your needs, from your worth, and from other people. And basically, as a hypnotherapist, what I know with 25 years of working with people around trauma and anxiety and addiction is that disconnection from yourself can be really devastating and can be a lifelong pattern. But utilizing hypnosis and hypnotherapy can help you restore that internal connection, because we get very conditioned to disconnect, right? Disconnect, compartmentalize, go to work, don't think about it, don't feel those things. And we just are told not to listen to our bodies. We ignore those signs and symptoms and those things that are coming up emotionally and physically, and just push through and move forward and do what we have to do. Right. And so, what hypnotherapy can do is it can help you restore that internal connection. And it gives my clients not just a relief, but a renewed sense of identity. It helps my clients to remember who they are truly before all those things, because there is a beneath the pattern, beneath the trauma, beneath the pain, beneath the addiction. There really is. But sometimes we forget what that was and who that was because it was so, so long ago. So let's identify some toxic thought patterns, things that you might be in the habit of, because we can also get addicted to these habit loops and these thought loops. So toxic thought patterns are often really sneaky. They can manifest as negative self-talk, where you're harshly criticizing yourself, catastrophizing, where you're kind of expecting or imagining that worst case scenario. For example, let's say you're make some kind of small mistake at work, and a toxic thought pattern might lead you to think, I'm going to get fired for this. And then you start going the rabbit hole of imagining yourself losing everything, worst case scenarios, even though reality is far less dire than that. We can also fall into things like perfectionism, where you drive yourself to meet really unrealistic standards, like the feeling that you must always be on, be taking care of everyone, be the best at everything, or like you're a failure. You're just kind of all or nothing type of thinking. So it's either, perfect or it's not. I'm either doing this or I'm failing. You can also have emotional reasoning. You might feel nervous, anxious about a situation, and then convince yourself that something bad must be about to happen simply because you feel that way. I have a client, he has a history of abuse from his father as a child, where those patterns have been passed down through the generations. And he often had a feeling of impending doom that something bad was going to happen if he ever expressed positive emotion, like hope, that it would all be ripped away from him. And so that was something that we needed to work through in our hypnotherapy sessions. These patterns, often rooted in the subconscious, need to be recognized in order to be changed. But when they're below the surface and you're just working at this conscious level, you're really just spinning your wheels. So, hypnosis and hypnotherapy is an amazing way to make that happen. And all that means, because I know it sounds magical or mystical or something, but it's absolutely not. So, we're going to talk about some tools for recognizing those toxic thoughts, because it's just relaxing on purpose for a positive purpose to help you to be able to get to what's going on below the surface. And hypnotherapy is utilizing therapeutic tools and processes for that, of changing, again, thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. Whatever unwanted things that you want to change, because you're always in control and it's always you in the driver's seat for that. So, yes, you can write. You hear about journaling and thought records. It doesn't have to be an official journal like something like this, but it's just getting things out of your head can be a great tool for just starting to recognize those toxic thoughts. What are you saying to yourself? What are you saying about yourself? Just starting to become more aware of that. Put a note in your phone, jot it down. So one thing that can be even more powerful is saying it out loud. Do a voice note. When you hear it in your head, you say it out loud. That might be enough to jar you that, wow, that's not actually true. Sometimes the voice in our head, it was not actually our original voice. Like that client that I was just talking about, his internal voice was really his father's voice that then got internalized and he started treating himself that way. And so to start recognizing these patterns, some mindfulness types of exercises about, stopping and being aware of, wow, like that's what's going through my mind. And what does that mean that I believe? And doing it without judgment, observing your thoughts without judgment, just curiosity, so you can learn about what's actually going on that you didn't even realize below the surface. And, so you can, write longer things. You can just jot down those notes and then work on shifting and reframing those, which we're going to talk about. But I want you to think about this. Um, Take a moment to just reflect on some of your own subconscious programming. Are you saying things to yourself like, I'm not good enough, or success is hard to achieve, or one that was passed down from my father, for example, was you have to work really, really hard to be successful. Now, I come from a family of people who work hard with their hands. Now, I absorbed that and I don't build things with my hands. So, what did I translate and turn that into? Well, I turned that into, in my own mind, that I had to basically burn myself out and overwork in order to justify my success and be respected for it. Because anyone who didn't work with their hands wasn't a hard worker and wasn't respected in my familial line, with the males in my family. And so I wanted to have that respect. And so I had to work long hours. I had to work really physically hard in order to justify that success. And the funny thing is, and the ironic thing is, that my father would always say, well, don't work too hard after passing on that generational pattern to me. And it would really irritate me way back when, because I was like, but like, that's how I'm earning that respect. Right. So I want you to just think about, with these thoughts, to take a moment and think, is this actually true? Right? Is that true? And we can really take a look at, if that's true or if it's just something that's been passed down. Now, we can also identify toxic relationship patterns that may have been passed down as well. And, I'm going to tell you, with those toxic thoughts, that hypnotherapy is fantastic. And I also teach people self hypnosis to help them relax that critical, hypervigilant conscious mind, to tap into their subconscious, find the root cause of those toxic thoughts and behaviors. And these relationship patterns are part of the behaviors, right? That's important. So, toxic relationships, right, can also be that outward pattern from those toxic thoughts and beliefs, right? So they can be just as harmful as those toxic thoughts. And internal habits, the things that we do to ourselves and how we speak to ourselves, often then come out in our relationships as well. And so, there's things like codependency, where one person's identity is enmeshed with another. You might feel your happiness depends entirely on your partner's approval, leading you to suppress your own needs, for example. Could be emotional manipulation, gaslighting, imagining a situation where you express concern about a friend's behavior and they respond by telling you you're just being overly sensitive or imagining things. You may have been told that by your family growing up too. You're just being too sensitive. I have a male client who's in the later half of his life, and we're doing a lot of work around that, around the fact that he is a more emotionally sensitive person, and that's okay. It's okay for him to be like that, because he was always told that it wasn't okay. And constant criticism and blame, is what he was getting, is so much criticism rather than encouragement, as well as a lack of boundaries. Those can be definitely other signs. Um, you may be in a toxic relationship pattern where one partner is constantly belittling the other one, their achievements, invading their privacy, making them feel like they're always in the wrong. Um, we get drawn to the familiar. So what happens is, our subconscious goes to whatever's comfortable, even if it's uncomfortable, it's familiar. And so we get drawn into what we feel is normal, and we get sucked into these relationships that mirror our primary relationships that were modeled for us growing up. And those patterns play out over and over again in our lives. And we can break that. We can break that pattern, and we can show our next generation something different. We just have to recognize those patterns as that first step to change. Okay. So when we're addressing these toxic patterns, often begins with setting clear and healthy boundaries. Like I said, the very first step, of course, is awareness. Um, but if you have a family member, like I have another client where he has been trying to, break free from this toxic relationship pattern with his mother, for example, because she's constantly calling him at all hours with her problems. He was really basically parentified, is what I call that, where the roles were reversed, and he has felt like he's always had to take care of her. And she's calling at all hours with her problems. And so he's learning how to set boundaries by telling her, that there are times, for her to call, and the way he wants to shift this relationship, because it's not okay and it doesn't feel good for him, and it's not helpful for either of them. And it can be really challenging, but it's crucial for protecting your mental health and your well being and for breaking those patterns. You can practice assertiveness versus aggressiveness, right? There's a difference of learning assertive communication and setting clear boundaries and communicating those. There's a difference between that and being aggressive. And when you've had this pattern in the past of things going from, 0 to 60, and it's either everything's good or everything goes into that anger and aggression, it's important to learn how to regulate your nervous system and learn how to set those boundaries. So then what happens is we're creating a new pathway that we're then cementing in its own right. We're not choosing that super highway anymore. And we're learning how to hit the pause button so we can stop and choose how to respond versus reacting the way we've always reacted. Right. And so, for example, if you were bullied growing up and someone makes jokes at your expense, and you usually go that 0 to 60 route, then it's learning how to assertively but calmly explain that those comments are not okay, that they are hurtful, and we can stop playing out the same pattern over and over and over again. And when you start shifting the way you interact, other people respond. Right? It takes one person to stop that and to start communicating, right? Stopping the loop and start communicating for the other person to then think a new thought and do something different as well. And some cases, it may be important to distance yourself from relationships that are persistently harmful, or to learn how to avoid certain topics, or limit interactions of different kinds with certain people. Might involve reducing contact with a toxic family member, or steering the conversation away from certain things, or maybe doing something different around romantic relationships or friendships, making different decisions. But there's a lot of really great techniques that I use in hypnotherapy to help people establish and communicate boundaries, to help them practice assertive communication. We can resolve conflict with others and often also within ourselves at different ages and stages with the different trauma or stressors that you may have been through. Again, whether somebody else would deem that as something that was a big deal or not, there are those milestones that we can go back to and visit and give that version of you what they needed, even though you didn't get it originally. So when I'm looking at, healing with hypnosis through hypnotherapy, here are some more of the tools that I use with clients to help them release old patterns. We might do things like guided visualization to uncover where those patterns began, helping you reconnect with your true identity beyond survival mode, releasing old emotional baggage. The language of the subconscious is imagery, symbolism, creativity. So help you to set aside that critical analytical part of your mind that's usually always hypervigilant and on, and be able to tap into that to release old emotional baggage. You can do grounding practices, helping you feel safe and present in your body, again, reconnected versus disconnected, and helping you to visualize and build the life that you want. Because again, instead of just knowing what you don't want, we also want to figure out what it is that you do want and what it is that you're moving towards, because that's really important as well. And so when we're looking at why you might feel stuck, many people unknowingly do stay stuck because their subconscious actually sees a benefit to what you think is the problem, but is actually your subconscious's solution to the original problem. So we call that in hypnotherapy secondary gains, helps you renegotiate some of those outdated contracts of, when this happens, this is how I respond. And so addictions and other unhealthy coping strategies, like these toxic thoughts and relationship patterns, initially had a positive purpose. It was how you had to operate, for example, in order to survive in your household growing up. Like that was the dynamic that you had to play out in order to make it through. They just might not be working for you anymore. Or it could be, again, those substances or those different coping strategies. So, for instance, staying addicted can keep you bonded to someone, or keep you small enough to not feel the big feelings when you were told that your feelings were too big. And sometimes we hold on to pain or habits because part of us just believes that we still need them, or we're afraid of feeling all the things and that we'll be overwhelmed in what will happen. Maybe staying stuck helped us stay connected to a loved one, or maybe change feels unsafe in some way. And so hypnotherapy helps your mind renegotiate those old agreements and integrate so that your conscious mind and the goals and the vision and what you want for your life and your subconscious can be on board and on the same page, and you can move forward without things like shame and fear and anger. And so, in order to kind of go through this healing process, I give my clients really practical tools that they can use anytime, even outside of our hypnotherapy sessions. So, visualization techniques to manage stress or cravings, for whatever those coping strategies are, whether that's doom scrolling or drinking or smoking or, shopping, gambling, whatever it is, eating. I give them anchors for calm and confidence, tools to help them regulate. So I like to think of nervous system regulation as being a thermostat versus a thermometer. A thermometer reacts to everything around it. It goes hot, it goes cold, whatever's going on, it reacts. And being reactive, right, is often what a lot of people are wanting to break free from. And so being the thermostat is where you set your comfortable temperature. My clients call it the window of okayness. I've got this, I can handle this, it's all figure outable. And if we're angry, if we're getting aggressive, anxious, any of that, we're going hot. If we are withdrawing and disconnecting and isolating, we're getting cold. So I'm giving you some really practical tools when I work with clients on bringing themselves back into the window of what's more comfortable for them, not familiar, but actually comfortable. And then those journaling prompts and things that we talked about earlier about whose voice am I hearing right now? What part of me, is coming up right now? Like, what is coming up for me? What are you feeling? So, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Sensations in your body. And what can you do to shift that in that moment? Those types of tools help you stay connected to yourself and keep that healing going, even when you're not in therapy sessions. And so, ways to rewire your brain, right? Ways to rewire your brain and reprogram. We talked about the computer program, reprogram your subconscious, things like affirmations and visualizations, and finding yourself in that relative safety. It's powerful work, it has to feel safe. With hypnotherapy, one of the things that I love is I always meet clients where they are. And there's no need to go back into and relive the trauma. It's just an invitation to gently release what's been weighing you down. If you feel like the weight of the world has been on your shoulders, so you've had this vice on your chest, for example, or this like heaviness in your stomach, this boulder, all the things that have been weighing you down, and really build something stronger and more resilient in its place, but not this false sense of strength where you're just trying to hold it all together inside and keep it strong on the outside. Right? It's about really connecting and creating that inner strength that allows you to feel and allows you to release. And so we can address those toxic patterns. Like I said, awareness is that first step in that reprogramming, like we've been saying. And so once you identify, you can address those toxic thoughts and patterns. Cognitive restructuring is a technique where we can challenge and reframe negative thoughts. So if you catch yourself thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so terrible at this or that, you can challenge that thought by asking, what evidence do I have that this is true? Have I ever succeeded at this before? What are my strengths? You might realize that your thoughts aren't as accurate as they seem when you do that. And so, what healing can really look like is when you start healing these inherited patterns, so much shifts. You stop reacting and you can start responding. You communicate more clearly and more calmly. You feel more grounded in who you are. And these habits or addictions lose their grip, not because you fought it, but because you no longer need them in order to cope, because you have healthier and better ways to cope. So I want you to take a moment to ask yourself. I shared a couple different options with you with clients and one for myself. What's one belief or behavior that you know didn't start with you, but you've carried it for too long? Hey, what's one thing that you know you're playing out that pattern, and know that that awareness is that first step toward freedom, that you don't have to hold it anymore. Something that's been with you and is ready to be rewritten. You can take a moment to really breathe and think about that. Think about what is something that you want to break free from. What are you ready to change? And what's going to be different in your life when you do that? If you made that change, what would that free you from? That's an amazing feeling, to think like, I could be free from this, when you've been telling yourself for so long, this is just how it is and it's not changeable. And that's been told to you for generations. We all have our stuff, and that's just human. And it's okay to feel the things and to move through that. So I want to talk, as I'm starting to close out, I want to talk about why it's so important in the work that I do to be solution focused and trauma informed, because those are some of the most important principles of the work that I do. Excuse me, allergy season here. So being trauma informed means I don't rush or override my client's readiness. It's about regulation, it's about consent, it's about honoring the nervous system and guiding my clients toward the how while still holding space for the why, right? The why, the pain that I mentioned earlier that Dr. Gabor Mate talks about, but really moving you towards the how and honoring all of the pieces of you. Being really solution focused means identifying resources, orienting towards the future of like, okay, how are we going to make these changes that you want to make? And really tapping into your own strengths. And together, they empower my clients to understand their past, but really focusing on creating the future. And so I have a couple of opportunities for you. If this has resonated with you and you are wanting to learn more from me about this topic, or you're wanting to dive into your own healing journey, I have two things that I would like to share with you. And so one of them is going to be a special workshop, masterclass actually, that I have coming up that I want to share with you here in a moment. And then the other one is going to be an opportunity to connect with me directly. Okay. And then I'm going to break for some questions. I'll be able to check all of your comments because I can't see them right now. So I'll be able to check those and we'll be able to have a conversation, because there's really two ways to go about this. when you're in your healing journey. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to share, whoops, let me go back. The first thing I'm going to share with you is I'm actually teaming up with a good friend of mine and business partner who is someone who is an addiction specialist. I spent 10 years of my career working with people who are dealing with drug and alcohol addictions, as well as I've spent my whole career around trauma and abuse. But basically, this friend of mine and I are putting on a free masterclass where you can learn, especially if you're somebody who wants to learn the skills yourself in order to understand that subconscious code of addiction and break the cycle. If you are a practitioner of any kind, if you're a coach, if you're a counselor, if you're a healer, if you're a self healer who's like, hey, I really want to learn how to do this, we're going to teach you how hypnosis for addiction can really make this huge lasting impact. So that's the first thing that I want to share with you. And I will pop that in the comments here in just a second as soon as I stop sharing. But it's just hypnosisforaddiction.com/masterclass, or you can scan this QR code. So go ahead and do that really quick. And then the second option that I have for you is to book a free 30-minute consultation with me. If you have questions, if you want to explore options for individual one-on-one support, if you are somebody who, some of these things resonated with you and you really want to know how this could benefit you specifically, I would love to answer those questions for you. And so this QR code or just my website, psychedupsuccess.com, can take you directly there where you can book a call with me and we can discuss what is going to be the best option for you moving forward and how hypnotherapy and transpersonal wellness can really be a great option for you. So give you a second to do that. And then, like I said, I'm going to pop those two links into the chat for you as well. I have them ready to go. I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can get out of this page and back to where you all are so that I can see you. There we go. So I'm going to pop this in for you. There you go. So both of those links are here and I'm going to check the comments really quickly. Perfect. Yes, you're so welcome. I'm so glad that resonated. Absolutely. So thank you. And thank you, Jamie, so much, our host here, because this is a really important topic. When we're talking about how men are raised in our families and in our society, and we're talking about emotions and we're talking about suppressed emotions, often things that get stuck and suppressed in our nervous system, in our subconscious. And again, they're told that we're not supposed to feel, that we're not supposed to express that emotion, that you have to be strong all the time on the outside. Often there's that feeling of something missing or disconnected or broken or being wrong on the inside because they can't just keep that facade up 24/7. That's so much pressure and that's so much expectation that comes from the outside and then gets internalized. And so being able to get below the surface to do that healing work is crucial for all of us, but definitely specifically when we're talking about men and those coping strategies that get created out of that trauma, out of that disconnection. It's just so key that we break that cycle and we make those changes moving forward for the ones that are coming up. And as soon as somebody makes that change and breaks that pattern, there's a ripple effect that will go further than we will ever truly realize. It will just keep going and going and going. And that is the beautiful thing that I love so much about the work that I do. So I want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for watching, whether you're here live right now or you're watching this later on the replay. And again, love for you to come to the masterclass. Please reach out to me directly for a consultation. You can do that literally anytime, and I would be happy to support you. So have a great rest of your day and a great rest of the event.